Every year, thousands of us will go and have mini breaks across Europe. It's the perfect way to spend a small amount of money on a short holiday and get the chance to learn a brand new language, sightsee, or have a romantic break away by the Mediterranean or in Eastern Europe. Mini breaks are fantastic, but where's the best place to go? I've spent the last few years travelling around Europe, spending time in some of the most amazing cities, but while I've been there, I've been collecting stories. Whether they're famous legends or just whispers told by locals, I've compiled a list of the top 10 best city breaks to go through for your ghost stories. We start off with the capital of Germany, one of Europe's most visited cities in Europe, with around 13 million tourists flocking to see the remnants of the Berlin Wall at East Side Gallery, the Brandenburg Gate, the Reichstag building, and the television tower built by the Soviets in 1960, which you can get an amazing panoramic view from. But Berlin has myths and legends associated with it as well. While not a ghost story, the Führer bunker is where Adolf Hitler spent his final days and is widely believed to be the location where he took his life. But many believe he did not die in Berlin. In fact, he escaped Germany and fled to South America. It's a popular conspiracy theory. An underground tunnel is known to have led from the bunker to the old Tempelhof airport, which is now abandoned. I recommend doing a tour of the airport, which takes place twice a week and sees the hidden areas for yourself. The tunnel linking Hitler's bunker to the famous Nazi airport is now part of the underground metro line, so we know it once existed. The abandoned airport at Tempelhof is said to be haunted, but nobody knows by whom. I was taken on a private tour in 2018, and it is one of the strangest places I have ever been. Given the amount of servicemen who died here, it could be any of them. The Nazi secret tunnels made it all worth the visit. The Citadel in Spandau is an old 16th century fortress which some sentimental Berliners might tell you is haunted by the Weiße Frau, aka the White Lady. Joachim Hector of Brandenburg served as the Prince Elector from 1535 to 1571. He was a robust leader who was concerned about the interests of his principality and was extremely generous to his servants, but not his wife. In 1549 she was involved in a tragic accident, severely injuring her abdomen and making it difficult for her to walk. Joachim consequently decided to have a relationship with a lady named Anna Seidau, who would eventually live in the Grunwalder hunting lodge, which Joachim had built west of Berlin, and gave birth to two of Elector's children there. 10 years before Joachim died, he made his son Johann George promise to protect his beloved mistress, Anna, long after he was gone. But as soon as Joachim came to the throne in 1571, he went against his father's wishes and had her immediately arrested and taken to the Spandau Citadel, where she was imprisoned until her death in 1575. Just days before Johann George passed away in 1598, he supposedly saw her spirit appear to him as the Weiße Frau, who would subsequently return to haunt the halls of the Spandau Citadel in the years thereafter. But finally, in 1709, while the Berlin City Palace was being reconstructed, the skeletal remains, assumed to be that of Anna Seidau, were found. They were given a proper burial with the hope that the Spandau Citadel would no longer be haunted. Number 9. Bucharest. Romania will forever be associated with Dracula, but did you know that Bram Stoker based the character on a real-life man by the name of Vlad the Impaler, or more officially, Vlad Dracula? He lived in Transylvania, a region of Romania that several tour companies in Bucharest can take you to. Vlad is said to have killed from 40,000 to 100,000 European civilians, mainly political rivals, criminals, or anyone that he considered useless to humanity, mainly by impaling them. Legend says that he would dine with guests while blood would drop down onto the dinner table from those impaled above while they slowly died. It is no surprise that there are all kinds of ghost stories in the area around the woods associated with Vlad. The Ciania Monastery is a historical monument on the outskirts of Bucharest, near a garbage dump, subject to many legends and urban myths. One legend has it that the church is cursed. Although it was built to serve as a place of worship, it was also assaulted by the Ottomans and became a refuge for plague sufferers. Centuries ago, the bells were heard in Romanian monasteries on 2 occasions, during Mass or when the Ottomans were visible on the horizon and likely to attack. Today, at the monastery ruins on the outskirts of Bucharest, you are still said to be able to hear the bells ringing, although the bell was once destroyed a long time ago. Another interesting legend says that the ghost of a beautiful woman can be seen near the walls of the entrance. The woman is supposed to be Ancuta, the daughter of Lady Ciania, a very interesting historical figure on her own. Ancuta was killed at the orders of her mother because she ran away with her lover. The Cismigiu Hotel was built at the beginning of the 20th century, and it was formerly known as the Palace Hotel. It closed in 1970 but reopened in 1990 and serves as a hostel for students. Legend says that one weekend, a young student was raped and thrown into an elevator shaft. She didn't die immediately and continued to scream for help for about 3 hours, but nobody heard her and were able to help her. Therefore, it is said the young woman's ghost still haunts the hotel, and you can hear her terrible screams coming from the elevator shaft to this day. Number 8. York. It is often claimed that York is one of the UK's most haunted cities. It is, however, home to one of the most famous ghost stories in the whole of Britain, and that is in the Treasurer's House. In 1953, 18-year-old Harry Martindale was working as a plumber, tasked with working on a boiler in the old wine cellar. After a while, Harry claims that he heard a trumpet sound getting louder until it felt as if it was right underneath his stepladder. He claims to have seen the figure of what he describes as a Roman soldier wearing a plumed helmet emerging from the wall. The soldier walked straight through the cellar, but was only visible from the knees up. This was followed by 9 to 10 more soldiers and a horse, again only visible from the knees up. He described them as carrying round shields in their left arms and daggers in their right arms. Harry was terrified and ran from the cellar, refusing to go back inside. Many years later, excavations in the city revealed that the descriptions of the soldiers' dress given by Martindale, at first dismissed as silly, in fact matched the local reserve soldiers who took over the Roman garrison when the regular soldiers began returning from Rome in the 5th century. A Roman road has also been discovered running below the Treasurer's House, which would match Harry's description of seeing them walking with their knees below ground level. Harry sadly died a couple of years ago, and despite later working as a policeman, he did not change his story and never accepted any payment for his version of events. And his story isn't the only ghost story in the building. Several ghosts reportedly haunt the house, including that of George Aisleby, who owned the property in the 17th century. You can visit the Treasurer's House today and even visit the cellar where Harry claims to have seen the Roman ghosts. A section of the floor has been cut away so you can actually see the Roman road underneath. The Golden Fleece is Britain's narrowest pub, but it is also said to be the most haunted. Dating back to the 16th century, the most famous ghost is that of Lady Alice Peckett, the wife of John Peckett, who used to be the Mayor of York and also the owner of the building. She has been seen on the main staircase as well as moving furniture around during the night. Another of the ghosts is a Canadian airman who fell to his death from the upper windows of the hotel during World War II. Other ghosts include a man known as One-Eyed Jack, often seen wearing 17th century outfits and carrying a pistol in the bottom bar of the pub. There's also a grumpy old man and a young boy from Victorian times who was trampled to death by horses right outside the front of the Golden Fleece and is often seen in the top bar. Some people claim even tries to pickpocket people. This photo shows what appears to be a shadowy figure standing between the bar at the back of the pub. Nobody has been able to identify who it could be, but the figure is stood directly below a false ceiling where there is a hook, apparently where a former landlord hanged himself. Staff often report feeling a tightening around their neck while standing in this area. York's most famous landmark is the Minster. It is believed to have been built in 627 AD and is one of the most frequently shared stories of ghostly goings-on in the city. This structure dates back to the 1820s, and when two members of a tour group were separated from the crowd, they found themselves wandering alone through the building. On their wanderings, they encountered a man in a naval uniform. The man approached the ladies and whispered in one of their ears before walking off and vanishing. The story goes that he was actually the woman's brother, and they had made a pact that whoever died first would come back to tell the other one there was really an afterlife. After dying at sea, the brother came back and kept his promise to his sister. Another man by the name of Dean Gale, who died just 26 years old in 1702, is said to be seen in the pews at the back, listening to services. The area around the Minster also seems to be a popular hangout for local ghosts and is home to some of York's most famous haunted houses. 5 College Street is reportedly home to a ghost of a young girl who wanders around upstairs. Some have seen her face even staring out of the small window upstairs in the corner. When the Black Death spread across England in the 14th century, the 6-year-old was locked in a boarded-up house with the bodies of her dead parents who had died from the disease. She wasn't infected, however she was left there to slowly starve to death. When in York, make sure you visit 35 Stonegate. It was built in 1482, but records show a house has been on this site for at least 1,000 years. So far, 14 different ghosts have been reported to haunt the place. A sobbing woman in the basement, a little girl who fell to her death from a window at the back of the house, and a cat have all been seen by visitors. Just a few years ago, the skeletal remains of a cat were found, bricked up during renovations. I could go on for ages about York, from its haunted railway museum to the children who died in a narrow alleyway of Goodram Gate, where an old workhouse once stood. It's worth a visit and easily accessible via railway. Number 7. The capital of France, Paris is said to be the most romantic city break of them all. 23 million tourists checked into hotels in Paris last year, and it is home to the Louvre, the most visited art museum in the world, the Eiffel Tower, and of course the Arc de Triomphe. But these are just the modern additions. Much of Paris's dark legends go back much further in time. But the first story starts with the Eiffel Tower. In 1925, an American man fell in love with a French woman called Sophie. After meeting her in the Jardin du Luxembourg, he proposed to her on the first level of the Eiffel Tower. But when he pulled out the ring, she screamed, backing up on the edge of the tower, where she tripped and fell to her death. Legend has it that people still see a girl in 1920s clothing sitting on the railing outside of the corner of their eyes. Some say they hear her screams on the anniversary of her death. Staying in 1925 and also in the Jardin de Luxembourg, a young medical student by the name of Jean Romier was basking in the evening sun when a man approached him. He was wearing a long black coat and proceeded to sit on the bench next to Jean. After exchanging pleasantries, Jean and the mysterious man, who introduced himself as Alphonse Bourrier, discovered they shared the love of chamber music. Bourrier mentioned that he had in fact organised a concert that very day at his apartment and would be honoured if Jean would join him. Seeing no cause for alarm, Jean readily accepted. The apartment was located just around the corner. It was a large and richly furnished, old-fashioned style of building. The small group of friends sat waiting at the start of the concert while Jean and Bourrier arrived. Shortly after, the music began. As the evening wore on, Jean found himself immersed in the music. Only when the clock struck midnight did he finally say his goodbyes and left the apartment. Out on the street with a cigarette in hand, Jean reached for his empty pocket for a lighter. He realised he must have forgotten it inside the apartment, so he turned round and began mounting the steps to the 3rd floor. He knocked on the apartment door, but there was no answer. He knocked again, silence. Then he began to shout. After a long while, a neighbour who was awoken by the commotion demanded to know what was going on. Jean told her what had taken place and how he'd left his only lighter in Bourrier's smoking room. The neighbour explained that this was impossible, because while it was indeed his apartment, it'd been empty for a while. He had been dead for 15 years. Jean isn't the only person in the Jardin de Luxembourg who has been visited by a man wearing a black fur coat. If you are approached by a mysterious man confessing his love for Mozart and inviting you to come and see his classical concert, I'd probably say, j'aime seulement le hip-hop. The Phantom of the Opera was first released in 1911, written by Gaston Leroux. It recounts the story of a phantom that dwells deep beneath the Paris Opera House. Leroux was an investigative journalist who, upon his death, claimed that the story was inspired by true events. From the building of the Opera House, problems began. Water began to drain from its foundations. When it proved impossible to drain away, a decision was made to just leave it there, just like the story. There is an untouched lake underneath the building. The Phantom of Laroux's book is based upon a real person who once lived in France. He was born with such a disfigured face that when in public he would wear a white mask. The story goes that he fell in love with a soprano who used to sing at the opera. But when his love went unattended to, he locked himself below the Paris Opera House and starved to death. Later, thanks to a construction worker, a skeleton was found. Ever since, performers have claimed to hear ghastly whispers around the opera. Some have claimed to have seen a figure with a cloak and a white mask walking through the rooms. Somewhere next to the murky water and underground tunnels, the ghost of Paris's opera house still remains. The Gardens of Versailles is a must-visit, set in the grounds of the famous palace, but they aren't without their mysterious tale, and one of the most famous legends to come from Paris. The most well-known story comes from two women, who in the summer of 1901 were taking a stroll through the outskirts of the gardens where Marie Antoinette used to spend her time. The women claimed that while they were walking, they entered a different time. They noticed that the people walking around appeared to be dressed in 18th century attire. At first, they were not bothered. As the evening wore on, they started to expect that they had stumbled into something they did not belong to. Finally, nearing the end of the walk, they claimed to have seen the ghost of Marie Antoinette herself, the famous queen, beheaded in 1792. Finally, Paris has over 120 miles of underground tunnels, known as the Catacombs de Paris. Here you will find the bones of over 6 million Parisians. Strangely enough, this is not where the stories of the hauntings come from. There are many secret entrances into the underground catacombs, and adventurers have been exploring them since they were first discovered. One of these adventurers is a man called Philippe Aspierre, who wandered into these tunnels only to find he had forgotten the way out. He died down there and stayed there for nearly 11 years before he was discovered. It was said that some people hear him calling through the misty tunnels, still trying to find his way out. If you are lost in the tunnels, do not follow him. Even hundreds of years later, he has not found the right way out. Number 6. Dublin. The capital of the Republic of Ireland, Dublin, sees more than 4 million visitors per year. Its name comes from the Gaelic term Black Pool, believed to have come from the area where two rivers merge close to the castle. If you like your facts, then the O'Connell Bridge is the only bridge in Europe that is the same width as its length. But the most famous attraction in Dublin is the Guinness Stonehouse factory. In fact, Dublin, famed for its drink, with St. Patrick's Day the biggest night of the year. At time of this video, there are 666 licensed pubs in Dublin. Dublin's most famous legend comes from just south of the city itself, and that is the Hellfire Club on Montpellier Hill. Members of the Irish Hellfire Club, which was active in the years 1735 to 1741, used this mount as their meeting place. Stories of wild behaviour, and occult practices and demonic manifestations have become part of local folklore over the years. The building is now known as the Hellfire Club, and it was built in around 1725 as a hunting lodge by William Connolly, the Speaker of the Irish House of Commons. Members of the club would drink so heavily and would always leave an extra chair vacant for the devil himself. One of the best known tales is a stranger who arrived at the club on a stormy night. He was invited in and he joined the members for a game of cards. One player dropped his cards on the floor, so when he bent down under the table to retrieve them, he noticed that the stranger had hooves. At this point, the visitor disappeared in a ball of flame. Another strange story tells of a priest who came to the house one night and found the members engaged in sacrificing a black cat. The priest grabbed the cat and uttered an exorcism, upon which a demon was released from the corpse of the cat. There are even accounts of human sacrifices here too. At some point during this period, the building was damaged by a fire. There are several stories connected to the incident, from members wanting to give the club the appearance of hell, or whether it was done by the devil himself. Hill walkers have complained of feeling a tug at jewellery worn around their necks, especially crucifixes, and have said they thought it to be the work of invisible hands. Dublin's oldest pub, the Brazen Head, is said to be visited by one of its former customers, bold Robert Emmet, who was hanged in September 1803. He's often spotted in the corner of the bar, keeping an eye out for his executioner, who by coincidence also drank at the same pub. The first reports of ghostly activity in Kilmainham jail were recorded by workmen who restored it in the 1960s. Lights turning on and off, footsteps following them down deserted corridors, and gusts of wind knocking them over while they worked on the site are some of the stories told by the workmen. Just at the back of the four courts, you'll find St. Michan's Church. It's nothing special from the outside, but inside, hidden under the church, lies the vaults. Bones, skulls, and human remains spill out over stacked coffins in there, and there are mummies with caskets open to view too. Many people report hearing whispers while there is nobody else around, and being touched by invisible hands. 13 Henriette Street has been used as the set for films and music videos, but it also has a more sinister reputation. Apparently the ghost of a woman exorcised in the house still haunts the premise. The phantom has been spotted by neighbours and passers-by in old clothing, standing by the window gazing out onto the street. Collins barracks are said to be very active too. Visitors have reported sightings of figures in Napoleonic uniforms, believing them to be reenactment groups, only to be told that no such groups exist on the grounds. Gunshots and horses are often heard by the guards on duty here too.